All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Goblin King YouTube channel. I know it's been a little while. Just
He's back.
been busy with school starting up, but we're back and we're doing a pretty big video. I have spent probably the last, I don't know, not couple months. I'd say at least half a year rereading the Harry Potter series. And as you guys might know, I'd also been reading the Percy Jackson series and a bunch of other stuff at the same time. So I've been on this kind of trend of going back, rereading a lot of books from, when I was first getting into reading and things like that. And I've only read this series one time. So I wanted to take a deep dive, go back into this series and see if it held up, right? Like, did this series hold up for me when I got older? Did I enjoy maybe more of the themes? Did I enjoy the story more? What were my overall thoughts on this series? And so we're going to go into it. We're going to try to go through each of the books. I don't know about each of the books, but we'll go through kind of like the segments of the story where, like, I think each kind of like two books had its different writing style and it evolved as the series went on, which I think was something that's really interesting with the writing style, is that in so many series, I think they get caught up in continuing doing like the same kind of writing style, keeping with the same themes. This series overall evolved as it went on. The writing, sometimes I think, the writing would be not so great because of this element, and in the next book, that writing element would be completely fixed. So yeah, we're going to look at these books as a whole. Let me know if you guys want to see more Harry Potter content. I've thought about ranking the books, maybe talking about some like talking points that I think is very interesting individually into this story. And maybe some questions that I have that, again, not being the biggest Harry Potter nerd, I couldn't tell you like all the nitty gritty about everything in this series, but I do really enjoy it. And again, just for reference to, again, how long it's been since I've read these books, I remember reading the Deathly Hallows, the last book, when Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2 came out. I remember basically being in the theaters and basically talking to my dad and be like, see, this happened differently, being a nerd basically, and saying, oh, this happened way differently in the book and stuff like that. But yeah, let's get into this video. But if you guys are excited for, some Harry Potter content in this video, subscribe and let's get into it. So I think the biggest trend with this story is that when it first started, it was much more of a kind of a kid's story, more of a traditional coming of age story, right? Where again, our characters start out very young. It's very similar to like the Percy Jackson series, which I've reviewed on this channel. If you wanted to watch that, you can. But these characters start out very young, and you kind of feel that, right? There's not a lot of like really complex themes or adult themes. Like, there's some good stuff in here. I think one of my favorite things about the first book is this idea of this mirror, and this mirror shows what you desire the most. And for instance, like a character like Harry, it was, his parents, wanting to see his parents and things like that. That is a really interesting like idea, right? Like, what is something that everyone desires the most? And having this idea of the only way you can get the stone is by having kind of this pure intention with it. Like, you don't desire this stone more than anything is really the interesting part, or if you do, it's for the right reasons. That's a very interesting theme, but very much the way that this series was written, again, very similar to Percy Jackson. And again, I'm saying very similar to Percy Jackson. I'm saying that because this series influenced Percy Jackson quite a lot. But we would have this story, and it would be some sort of mystery. And the first two are very much like this, where you have some sort of idea, or you have who is this person, or what is this object. And so that was really the case in these first two specifically. And Chamber of Secrets and Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone, depending on where you are, really follow this pattern. And it's not bad, but it definitely is. I would say these two books are probably some of the weaker two of this of the series. I think they're definitely, growing blocks for the series. And again, the first book really is about introducing us into this world, introducing kind of our main characters, Dumbledore, Voldemort, Snape, There's not a ton in this first book that I think is incredible writing. It's really incredible world building, incredible developing our characters. Not necessarily like the most ingenious plot to begin with. And so I did really enjoy the first book. I didn't actually read the first book. This is the only book I didn't read. I listened to an audiobook of it. I have the rest of them over on my bookshelf. You guys can't really see it, but it's over there. I have all of the rest of them. And I really would actually say for this first book, reading or having an audiobook was really nice, because this is definitely the most casual, I think, of the books, where as you start going on, it gets more serious and you really want to pay attention and be reading it. I feel like the first kind of two are ones where you can kind of just sit back and just have some, like, you know, listening to it, a little bit of leisure time. And so, you know, the first book kind of has, oh, Voldemort, he almost comes back with his resurrection stone, and it's kind of gonna play more into the end of the series. There'll be a little bit more connection to this, but it feels like, again, wasn't, you know, a whole lot of stakes to this first book. Again, we know Voldemort really couldn't have done much to Harry because of kind of the Lily's like blessing or protection on him and things like that. So there wasn't as much stakes in these first two books. Specifically because of that. And so, yeah, I think book one was a good start. It wasn't anything crazy. It was a great introduction to the world. Again, it follows a very generic way of doing it. You have, you know, a character that doesn't know anything about this world, and so you're introducing into this world with this character. It's been done quite a lot, but it's something that just works really well. And Rowling does a really good job of, again, in doing it in a different way that still kind of fits into that genre of way of starting that journey. And again, you kind of have your main three. You know, you have Ron, who kind of develops into like this really, you know, brave character, but he does have his faults, like pride, I think, would be one. Hermione kind of being your smart, really bookish type character, and she's going to someone that's going to develop as well. Something that I think the movies really didn't get these characters completely down as they are in the books. But still, you know, I think they did an okay job of it. And so that kind of gets us into book two. Now, book two, again, follows a very similar format as book one, where you have this random mystery and you're going to try to figure out what is it, right? So we have this idea of the Chamber of Secrets. And I've always found that this book has the most intriguing idea. I really like the idea of the Chamber of Secrets. Like, there's this secret area in Hogwarts with this monster that's been waiting to be unleashed, and it's a really intriguing premise. The only issue with it is this book's pacing, I think, is probably the second worst of the series. Like, the back, like maybe third, is extremely interesting, but getting there, it just feels really long, because you're sitting here and like the mystery is, okay, who is the heir of Slytherin, and who is this person that's opening up the Chamber of Secrets? And there's this whole like subplot where people think it's Harry, which is interesting for Harry's development specifically, because Harry's sitting here going, okay, everyone thinks that he's this awful person, that he's a horrible person, and something's going to come up actually a lot that that Rowling's going to play with Harry, but to a minor scale. So it's like, we have this plot line that's going to be done later on in like Order of the Phoenix in a much better way. So when you look back on it, it's like, okay. And then you have this idea that, oh, okay, Draco is probably the heir of Slytherin, but it's like, I feel like from a book reading point of view, especially when you're an adult, it's like you kind of know this isn't really the case. And so you have a kind of a plot line where, okay, it's them trying to make this polyjuice potion, and then they're going to investigate Draco and try to figure out who it is. And that kind of falls through, and you're like, okay, well, I kind of saw this coming. So you kind of already gone through like half of the book already, and we really haven't gone anywhere, really. And so that's my biggest like issue, I think, with Chamber of Secrets, is like, it's a book that I really enjoyed growing up, and it's a book I really enjoyed the premise of. It just wasn't executed the best, in my opinion. Like, it's still really good. I still think it's a good addition to Harry Potter, and I really enjoy the back third, right? When we have this big reveal, Ginny's been taken into the Chamber of Secrets. They finally figure out where the chamber is, what the monster is, and we see Tom Riddle coming back. It's always been one of the most intriguing parts of, like, if Voldemort had come back through this Horcrux, what would have happened, right? You would have had two Voldemorts at the same time. It's a very interesting idea. And this whole final face-off, the Basilisk, has always been a monster that I've always thought is super cool. And it's a really interesting way to end out the story. You also have some, and again, you don't really have too many, like, really complex things going on in these first two books, but I do enjoy it. And I think, unfortunately for me, Chamber of Secrets is probably my lowest rated book, just based upon some of the things I touched on pacing and things of that nature. But that'll lead us into book 3. And this is where I think you have the first, like, shift in tone. Whereas the first two kind of felt like, okay, these are some nice kids books. They have some kind of happy endings and happy themes and stuff like that. You know, there are some things sprinkled in that are a little, you know, darker, like Harry's parents being killed is definitely a darker theme. Growing up, you know, an orphan, living with his uncle and aunt, which is not very pleasant. Being abused by your own uncle and your aunt and even your cousin. But we kind of take that next step in book 3, where we have this idea of the Prisoner of Azkaban, which is Sirius Black. He escapes this prison that sounds awful. It is basically off of Alcatraz in real life. Even the two sound very similar. And so you're already set up with this premise. Okay, all right, we have this guy that has escaped this prison, and he's coming after Harry, but we don't know why he's coming after Harry. And the initial, like, part of it is, okay, well, he was a big supporter of Voldemort. He killed Peter Pettigrew, one of James and Lily's friends. And this is where we really start to dive into some of the lore, right? Some of what were Harry's parents about? Who were they? What did they do when they were at Hogwarts? And you have this, again, mystery that's the same as, like, the first two. But inherently, the twists and turns, the pacing is so much better. I think for me, this is, again, one of those top 3 books in the series. I definitely think there's an argument for first. I just think it's a toss-up. But, you know, as we continue through the series, we'll kind of talk about them. But Prisoner of Azkaban has Harry taking a darker turn. Like, he is realizing that this is the guy that got his parents killed. He was the Secret Keeper. He is the one that betrayed his parents and let Voldemort kill them. That is a very interesting character dynamic to play with Harry. Harry goes through this feeling of anger and sadness and just pain that I think is so interesting in this story. And then when you finally get to, you know, the middle back third, and you see that this isn't even the case at all, that yes, Harry should have these feelings, but not towards Sirius. They should be directed at Peter Pettigrew, who is still alive. It's a very intriguing story. Peter Pettigrew had actually framed Sirius. We also get the introduction of Professor Lupin, one of the best characters in the story, of being a werewolf, which is interesting as well. And so we have this interesting, these interesting amount of characters where Voldemort is not even involved in this story, and I think it's one of the best of the series. That's something that's very interesting, is that, like, some of the books in this series don't really even involve Voldemort. Like, yes, he's a part of the story, and he influences the story, but he's not the actual main villain of the story. And those, I think, are some of the more compelling stories, which I think is very interesting. And so we get this, you know, it seems like happy ending. It seems like it's going to be like the first 2 books, where Sirius is going to actually have family. He's going to have his godfather, Sirius, back. He's going to clear his name. Peter Pettigrew will finally, you know, be put in prison, and that justice will finally be done. And everything goes wrong. And that, to me, is something that really shows the difference in the writing now, because this is the first of many where the books are not going to end very happy. Like, even the last book, when Voldemort is destroyed, it's a very somber ending, because you have so many people that died that it almost feels like, yeah, we won, but at what cost? And that's how we're going to go forward, right? After this book, someone important will die in every single book. And so this is kind of the kickstart of that, really that big tone change. There's going to be probably one more big tone change that'll happen. But this for now is kind of leaning into that darker theme. And the idea of Harry facing his fear, right? The Dementors really being this ideology of just fear, overcoming fear as it drains you. It drains that emotion, that pain from you. It's a really interesting book. I think this is, of the first three, easily the best one. And then the interesting part is, so then the way this is all kind of concluded is we have this idea of the time turners. It's something that's never used in the story ever again, really, which makes sense. They kind of open up some plot holes, but you know, thankfully Rowling kind of sees that and just destroys that idea later on in the series. But we kind of have this thing where Harry and Hermione go back in time and they save a few lives and all of that, and it's a nice little wrap up to the ending where it's like, it's more of a positive note, but still, like, we didn't get the good outcome, right? Like, Peter Pettigrew got away, Sirius is an outlaw and a fugitive. Things didn't really go well. Like, we kind of got like the middle ground where it's like, okay, at least Sirius didn't die. And that kind of gets us into Goblet of Fire. Now, I want to explain this to you guys because it has been so long since I have read Goblet of Fire before doing this reread, and I didn't really remember the book. But I've remembered the movies. I've seen the movies on television so many times. And Goblet of Fire was, funny enough, always one of my least favorite of the movies. I always found it just not good. And I always, you know, heard, especially when I was getting older, that everybody loved the Goblet of Fire book. And now I know why. The Goblet of Fire book does everything that I think maybe the first two books didn't do well. It has perfect pacing. And what do I mean by perfect pacing? Is when I talk about something like Lord of the Rings, right? Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring specifically, has perfect pacing where, again, you have, again, constant rising issues, but then you have those moments of relief, but it's still in the back of your head. And you feel like you're with the characters and you continue this nice arc. Goblet of Fire is the perfect balance between, okay, we're going through the school year, but there's this building kind of mystery of how Harry got into this tournament. There's something underlying going on. The tone is different. Somebody basically gets murdered at the very beginning of the story. Voldemort is back kind of on the rise, kind of in the background in this book until the very end. But we have these Triwizard Tournament tests, but they're perfectly placed so that it's enough to keep you interested, right? You'll have the school life, you'll have kind of some preparation, maybe some drama with our crew. You'll then get a tournament, which is extremely interesting. Then you have, again, some more downtime, preparing for the next one as it builds up, because all of these all build up. You're right there with Harry and how Harry kind of puts them off like, oh, okay, we can wait, you know, a little bit. It's not too bad. And then, bam, it shoots up on you again, and that it just builds up again. And then it kind of, you have a rest period, builds up again. And it all culminates with probably one of the best finales of any of the books, with the return of Voldemort. We see Cedric Diggory die, who's a character we've been getting to know throughout the book. And it is a plot point that's going to come back very heavily in the final book, with the idea of Voldemort using Harry's blood to come back. And also this, you know, Peter Pettigrew, kind of that plot line will come back in the final book as well. And we see Harry and Voldemort have their first duel. So it's a very important book for so many reasons, because now internally, now again, we're going to have another shift where Voldemort has returned. And this sets up the next book really well, because Harry is going to have a lot of things going on, right? He now is going to have this PTSD of seeing someone die in front of him with Cedric. He's going to know that Voldemort is back. And again, like I talked about, this book is probably up there in the top 3. I think the top 3 probably in no particular order are Azkaban, Goblet of Fire, and Half-Blood Prince. And this book, I believe it's not the longest, but I think it's maybe the second longest. It doesn't feel it, right? Where I'm going to talk about the next book of Order of the Phoenix. Order of the Phoenix feels like a long book. This book doesn't feel long at all. And just the whole setup of, okay, Alistair Moody wasn't Alistair Moody the whole time. It was Barty Crouch Jr. It's fantastic setup because it doesn't feel like anything out of left field because it was hinted at this whole time. We kept getting information on a Barty Crouch Jr. and Barty Crouch Sr. And all of it just seemed out of place. There seemed like there was something missing. And again, it follows this mystery pattern, but it does it in a way that's more engaging, more interesting. And for that final payoff by the end to realize that this was all a setup. We should have seen this coming. It worked really well. And I think a lot of the dynamics are interesting, right? Ron and Harry kind of have this split where Ron, by this 4th book, is kind of sick of Harry getting all the attention, always being in the spotlight. And it's very compelling because we can see why a character like Ron would feel like that. Ron, it feels like the sidekick, the person that's always in the background. And we know from Harry's point of view, Harry doesn't want to be in the spotlight all the time. He specifically hates that, right? Chamber of Secrets kind of set that up really well. Harry didn't want to be in the spotlight. He's a kid that was marked by this, right? He didn't choose for his parents to die and to be the savior of the wizarding world for a while, to defeat Voldemort. He didn't choose that. And so we see both of these points as very compelling. We know it's kind of just a petty argument these two need to get over, but it is interesting. Like, how do you write teenage characters growing up with these petty issues? We see, again, Ron and Hermione's relationship getting strained as well, as Ron is jealous over Hermione and Crumb's relationship that forms. Something that will continue as the story goes on. So again, I think the character writing is fantastic. The pacing is fantastic. The overall plot is fantastic. A lot of praise for, again, this book and the last book that we talked about. And that gets us into Order of the Phoenix. Order of the Phoenix is a book that is weird for me because of the movies. Order of the Phoenix is actually my favorite of the movies. So when I went into this book, I was like, okay, man, Goblet of Fire exceeded my expectations, and now we're going into Order of the Phoenix, which is a movie I really loved. And then I noticed the page count. The page count of Order of the Phoenix is significantly higher than a lot of the books in this series. And whereas Goblet of Fire was a long book and it didn't feel it, this book felt it. This book had bad pacing, just straight up bad pacing. There's just so much downtime, and I won't go as far as saying filler, because it's really Rowling trying to build, the Hogwarts schooling, like, world building aspect of it, like building up what the everyday life of these students is like. And I kind of went over this point, but we're also at this point seeing kind of the corruption of the Ministry that was, again, talked about kind of the end of the 3rd book, and then it was heavily brought up in the end of the 4th book. And so now we come back and Voldemort is back, and the Ministry is doing nothing. They're covering up. They're saying Harry and Dumbledore are liars. It's very interesting because we see this propaganda. That is one thing we really see heavily in this series, is the propaganda and how that's used, how it's so compelling. It turns people against Harry, and Harry has to deal with that. So I guess we'll go back, before I talk about the whole outlook of the book, we'll kind of go through what this story is more about. And so we see that Harry is starting to have this connection with Voldemort, where Harry can see into Voldemort's mind. And usually this is when Voldemort has extreme emotions. Harry is able to feel those and see into his mind. And that's going to work 2 ways by the end of this book. And whereas, again, I really like the themes and the character building and things, surrounding this movie on a grand scale, the way it was executed was not great. And I know this is something that Rowling, learned from in Half-Blood Prince, because she kind of takes all the criticism that this book got and fixes it in the next one. And so Harry is a person that, again, is sent back to live with his uncle and aunt again, because they got to keep up that protection, because Voldemort can't really touch him then. But the issue here is for Harry is he's very much out of the loop. He doesn't know what's going on. He's been left in the dark. Dumbledore's not contacting him. Nobody's contacting him. He is being watched, right? And so Harry very much feels isolated. He feels like he could be doing more. He feels like people have just are still seeing him as a kid. Harry is the one that dueled Voldemort. He is the one that saw him come back, and he's being left in the dark. Now, we know Dumbledore's motives here to, try and keep him safe and to delay having to tell Harry about the prophecy and things like that. He thought it would be for the betterment of him, and that's not the case. And we see how Harry struggles with deep anger issues, mistrust, constantly questioning people around him, why they're not telling him, why they're not allowing him to do things. And that's kind of, again, the massive theme of this book for Harry. And that really comes to a head by the end. And we'll kind of talk about that because there's another plot line that's going on here, is that Sirius Black and Harry's relationship is a very odd one. It's something that they really did not hit as much in the film, which is something I'm kind of glad they didn't do. But there's this idea here that Sirius, in my opinion, really treats Harry like his father James. Like, he kind of treats him like that. And it's a really odd relationship at times. It works really well, but you can see that Sirius has some flaws in the ways that he treats Harry. And so Harry kind of is being told, hey, this is, he is treating you like your dad, like you're just best buds. And we also see Sirius's recklessness. Sirius is someone that does not like to be kind of caged in his house. Again, he's still on the run. That's something that's going to be paid off by the end. So, again, I think the massive point about this book is that it has a good beginning, I think, and it has a good end. But how we get there is just not great. It's just, the execution is not there. There's too much downtime, or we're talking about studying for OWLs, or we're training to do apparition, or we're doing all these things, and it just feels so inconsequential when in the back of your mind, Voldemort is back. And so the main premise of this whole thing is that Voldemort is trying to get this weapon. There's something that he wants that he did not have the first time in the first Wizarding War with Voldemort. And so that basically drives the entire plot. Harry gets some visions of where this weapon might be. And there's this whole idea of the Order of the Phoenix forming again. So this is kind of this force that's going against Voldemort, kind of under the leadership of Dumbledore at this point. And another main, I think, theme of this is, again, the government or the Ministry of Magic's intervention into the schooling. As we see Dolores Umbridge, great character, everybody loves her, kind of taking over at Hogwarts and making life hell. So it's really, again, about showing that Harry is going to have that mistrust of the Ministry of Magic because of this, how they're not taking the threat seriously, which is allowing Voldemort to grow in the background, how Voldemort is preparing, building an army, and the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore is trying to do the same thing. It's just this building conflict is in the background, and there's just so many things in the story that just feel like, why are we discussing these now? There's just so much filler in here that I just do not enjoy personally. It makes this read really long. I think of all the books, Order of the Phoenix is the one I struggled on the most until I got past that middle section. And for any of my Song of Ice and Fire viewers, if you've read Fire and Blood, Order of the Phoenix really feels like Jaehaerys's reign, where it's like nothing is really happening. Like it's a peacetime, but you're really interested about what comes before and after. Kind of how the middle part of Order of the Phoenix kind of feels to me. And so we get to kind of this back third, and it's really good, right? The back third of this is really, really good. Like I talked about, Order of the Phoenix is my favorite movie, and the back thirds of both are pretty similar. We have Harry, who has, over the year been teaching some of his fellow classmates defensive spells and things like this, and curses and all that. And, he takes a couple of them, and they go to the Ministry of Magic looking for this weapon. and they eventually find it. It's this prophecy for Harry, and there's all this, fighting over with the Death Eaters, and it's really good, right? We really see that conflict being foreshadowed here of what is to come. And this is the reveal of Lord Voldemort. You can't deny it anymore, right? He's made a public appearance. He's made his move. And we see a fantastic duel between him and Dumbledore. One of the best moments of probably the entire series. Voldemort trying to get inside of Harry's mind and Harry being able to kind of repel him, which I think is a way better scene in the movies, by the way. I just want to point that out. But yeah, and so we also see, I think, the most impactful point here for Harry is Sirius's death occurs in this book. And this is something that continues to break Harry, where he's had this entire book of feeling angry, feeling frustrated, and feeling like he isn't supported, that he's alone, and even going down a road that maybe will take him to where Voldemort has become. And it finally breaks out after all this. When Dumbledore and Harry have their conversation, Dumbledore tries to explain why he's been doing all of this. And we finally get the idea that Harry has to be the person to take down Voldemort. Neither can live while the other one survives. And it's a really big reveal because you're just given, there's a big ton of pressure that's thrust upon us as a reader and Harry as well. Whereas, like, narratively, this makes sense, right? Harry's the main character. He has to be the one to take down the bad guy, but now it's confirmed. The weight has been put on us, and you also feel, you understand Dumbledore's side of the story of what happened in this book, but you still feel Harry's pain, his anger, and it just builds. And this book ends on a very sour note. Like, this is not, like, as we talked about with, like, maybe Prisoner of Azkaban, it ends on a pretty, mild ending. It's not completely bad. It's not completely good. These last two books, Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix, have really ended on pretty bad notes. Like, it's pretty, not like bad as in the story is bad, but the world is in a bad place. It's a very somber ending. And yeah, I would say, as much as I like some of the themes in this book and some of the overarching things that happen in this book, there's too much fluff. There was just too much there. There was too many different plot lines going on. And just so much that, like, it's not overwhelming, but it's like there's certain plot lines that you're not going to care about as much because there's so much being thrown at you. And I think the movie really understood that. When they did the Order of the Phoenix movie, they cut out a lot of that fluff. A lot of the things that, like, didn't need to be in this movie to tell that story. And so that gets us into Half-Blood Prince, which I think, again, was a movie I didn't really like when I saw it. This is what I think is really weird, is that the movies and the books in a lot of ways flip-flop for me, where the movies I didn't really like Goblet of Fire, didn't really like Half-Blood Prince, and then the books, it's like completely opposite. I like both of those, and then the ones I really liked, being Order of the Phoenix, I didn't really like the book. So Half-Blood Prince, again, it follows a lot of the same, I guess, tropes or things that's been done in the past of this mystery of who is the Half-Blood Prince? What's going on with Voldemort? What's this big memory or secret? So we follow those, mysteries, which is fine, right? They work really well in this book. And we see that this book is probably the most impactful of all of them, in my opinion, outside of maybe a Voldemort coming back in Goblet. But this whole book I really enjoy because it's, again, structured very similar to the way Goblet is structured. Again, it's Rowling understanding what did not work in Goblet of Fire or in Order of the Phoenix and improving, because this book is shorter than the last two books have been. And we get this idea that, again, we go through maybe some of our day-to-day stuff with Harry and the crew, but there's like weeks where nothing happens and we just skip. You can tell that Rowling understood where she went wrong in the last book. And so we also get this break where every once so often, about like every third of the book, we get this memory. We get to understand more about Voldemort's backstory, who he is as a person, what motivates him. And this is what the story needed. Because Voldemort, up to this point, he was just stereotypical bad guy. There really wasn't any backstory there. There was no real development as to who he was as a person. And even when we get the backstory of the character, it's not like he's the most complex villain. Like, he's very much like just basically Hitler in the wizarding world. And so I enjoy this book a lot because I really I like understanding why Voldemort is who he is. Why did he become that way? And it makes his confrontation with Harry in the last book much more interesting, because now Harry has more of an in-depth knowledge of who Tom Riddle or Voldemort is. And also, I mean, the tone is just very dark. I mean, this is a very dark theme now, because this is not Voldemort hiding anymore. Voldemort and the Death Eaters are at large now. They're publicly wreaking havoc. It's it's really the last tone shift, where now we go into the Voldemort era, which is really the last 2 books. And it works really well, because you have this idea right from the get-go that Snape is going to help Draco do this mission that Voldemort has given him. And it makes us question Snape's loyalties, like Snape is like Harry is suggesting, has been kind of suggesting the entire series. We get to this point where Dumbledore just shuts down. Snape is loyal to him, and that's all that needs to be said. And we as a reader sitting here going, Dumbledore, he's got all the signs here that he's not a good guy. And it's perfect writing, because when we get to the reveal in the last book, I'm going to talk about it, because a lot of people, and I think this was what was supposed to happen, is that Snape is a hero by the end. I haven't really mentioned it because I wanted to save it for book 7, but we're going to talk about that. I don't really agree. I think Snape is a complex character and kind of a morally gray entity, but I don't know if I'd go as far as saying he's a hero or that he was like redeemed as a whole in general. But let's continue with this book. So this book is really all about preparing Harry for the end times. It's for preparing him for what he has to do in book 7. So figuring out what Voldemort has done, what has made him so powerful, and the Horcruxes. That's kind of the big reveal, that Voldemort has split his soul a few times, and they have to destroy this. They've already started, with that being in the Gaunt Ring and what Harry did in Chamber of Secrets. So again, going back to why these books mattered, that being an element there. And so we go back to Chamber of Secrets and the diary that was destroyed. So 2 of the Horcruxes have already been destroyed. And so, again, I'm kind of skipping over a lot of the plot, but that's kind of because the plot is very straightforward in this book, right? There's a point that Rowling wants to get to that has to be achieved by the end. And that whole idea is, again, the idea of the Horcruxes, preparing for the end game and showing what the Voldemort and the Death Eaters are doing, how they're making the world just havoc. And so I think this is probably a good point to kind of describe why Voldemort is the villain that he is. He is someone that is deeply rooted in prejudice, is, you know, you have to be pure blood or else type scenario. He's more or less Hitler in wizard form. That's what he is, right? Hitler believed in the Aryan kind of race, the blood. If you were below that, you were just a lesser being. And so you should be either killed or put into camps or whatever. That's basically Voldemort in this story. Now, Voldemort has some interesting backstory, right? Where he was created because of a love potion. So there was no actual love. So Voldemort does not feel the emotion of love. He does not feel that. I know that was kind of retcon and something that Rowling did after book 7, which we're not really going to talk about because I don't consider it canon. But yeah, for this story, again, Voldemort does not feel that emotion, right? He does not feel companionship. He does not feel love. He doesn't feel those types of things. And we kind of start to uncover, like, Voldemort understanding, you know, his parentage, his lineage, that he was, you know, the person that was related to Salazar Slytherin. And we see a lot of that, which I think is very interesting, the way he grew up in the orphanage. And a lot of his upbringing kind of parallels a character like Harry, where they didn't have parents early on, had kind of a tougher life growing up, but whereas Harry becomes someone that is a good person, a kind heart, experiences that feeling of love and things like that. Voldemort was someone that was cruel. He would actively torment other children. He, when his first interaction with Dumbledore that we see, he is someone that is cunning, that he does let it slip, that he is kind of cruel, but at the same time, he holds it back. And it's a really great idea because you build the cunning of Voldemort as a character, how he was able to manipulate so many people to his cause, and this idea of his power, right? Voldemort is someone that believes in power over everything. And that's, again, going against what the main theme of the story is. And so, yeah, I mentioned Draco having this mission. Now, his mission, we find out by the end, is to kill Dumbledore. And this was really just like a suicide task from Voldemort. Voldemort did not expect Draco to be able to do this. And so this was kind of a punishment on the Malfoy family, and you definitely see that take its toll on Draco. Now, at this point of the story, we do not know that there is a setup that Dumbledore was already going to die and that he had ordered Snape to kill him. We did not know that at this point. So by the end of the story, Dumbledore and Harry had been looking for another Horcrux. They'd had some information, again, that Voldemort had brought these kids into this cave, and that's where he had put another Horcrux. It was something that was sentimental to him. He was someone that was not rational and would hide his Horcruxes where no one would ever find them. He hid them in places of importance to him. And he put his Horcruxes, or he put his soul into objects that mattered. So, for instance, we'll see Slytherin's locket, and we'll see some other things in the next book. But that is kind of what he did. And so they track this down, and it ends up being a dud. It's already been found. This is a fake locket. But they get back to Hogwarts, and the Death Eaters have already arrived. And there's kind of this battle for Hogwarts already going on. And so we get to this point where Dumbledore is disarmed by Draco, which is a massive point that comes back again into the next book. And Snape kills Dumbledore. Now, for us, the reader, it's like we've been thinking this the whole time, that Snape's the bad guy and that, oh, he's finally made his betrayal. And it's this ultimate death of our leading character, right? It's always been that when Dumbledore's alive, people at Hogwarts are safe. And we don't really have to fear because Voldemort fears Dumbledore. It's kind of like if you look at Gandalf dying in Fellowship of the Ring, that guiding character is now dead. Our other characters now have to take the lead. They have to be the ones to bring about the end of this threat. And all of this happens, and, Hogwarts is in a place of darkness, right? Dumbledore has been headmaster for a long time. He's always been our guiding character, and now he's dead. And, we have a whole ceremony for his death, something that was not in the show, which I think is egregious that it wasn't. And it really paints the picture of the last layer of protection for the Wizarding World being broken. And we also find out that Snape was the Half-Blood Prince, something that Harry had wanted to know this entire time. And it's kind of that dagger that, like, Harry has been following in the footsteps of the man that has just killed Dumbledore. And that gets into the last book, and the last book to me is kind of a culmination of all these things that have been set up. And again, I think book 7 has some pacing issues at times. I think it's one of the middle books, right? I think it's not the best of the books. I think there's other books that just have much better themes, much better plot. But this book isn't like, on the lower tier either. It's just kind of in the middle, in my opinion. But let's get into the last book, The Deathly Hallows. And so, getting into Deathly Hallows, I actually have a little thing I wanted to show you guys, just because I thought it was really cool. But when this book came out, I was 7 years old. It was 2007. I had liked the Harry Potter movies. I hadn't read the books yet. Again, I was only 7. But my aunt, who was a big, book person and all this, actually got this book the day it was released to the public. So this is like one of the freshest copies that you could get of this book. Came out then literally the night out at midnight when this book came out is when she got it. So again, just wanted to say, how cool that is. But Deathly Hallows, like I said, is to me a book that is a pretty good conclusion to the overall story, and it is pretty good. It's a good wrap up of everything. But inherently, I feel like this book has a bit of a pacing issue, where there's points of this book where it's just like it's not that interesting to read compared to other parts of the book, or even looking at kind of like the last couple books. I know I talked about Order of the Phoenix, but I mean specifically like Goblet, Prisoner of Azkaban, and Half-Blood Prince, where those books, in my opinion, it always feels like we're building something. We're not wasting a lot of time. And I don't want to say wasting time in the Deathly Hallows, but there's definitely moments in this book, especially I think in the front half, where it does feel like, we're kind of just wandering around. We have our trio and they're just kind of wandering around, and it makes sense because they have to figure out where all the Horcruxes. Dumbledore didn't tell them that information. And it's something that Harry needed to find out on his own. If Dumbledore had told him all of the answers and everything and all the puzzle, it wouldn't have worked out, because then the whole point of the story would not have worked. Because if Harry had known the Elder Wand was Dumbledore's, right, it would have been a temptation. It would have pushed Harry to doing things that he shouldn't need to be doing. And that's kind of the whole purpose, right? When we get this little idea when Harry dies, and we'll get to that later in this book, that's one of the key themes that Dumbledore kind of talks about. And so this book inherently has a lot of great themes. And one of my favorites is the idea of how long can Harry take watching his friends, his family. Again, think about one of the points of Order of the Phoenix. By the end of it, the whole purpose of that book really was to show Harry that he had more people than just, say, the people that were like maybe related to him or family. And by family, I mean Sirius Black being his godfather. He had more people that were close to him that he could rely on, like the Weasleys, like Hermione, like all of his friends at Hogwarts. And so when we get to this last book, and we're seeing a lot of these people being put in danger, people are dying. There's so many people that die in this book or even get injured. I think Lupin and Tonks are really the quintessential point of that, where Harry is having to watch people die for him. And it's one of those things that I really like, is that it just pushes Harry more and more. Because think about really the last couple of years of Harry's journey, where he's watched Cedric die. He's watched Sirius die. He's watched Dumbledore die. He's, again, even in the very beginning of this book, Moody dies. And all of this is kind of in support of Harry. Now, Cedric's maybe not as much, just because Cedric was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. But still, Harry is constantly have this theme of having people die around him, his parents. And this book really makes it a point of, yes, Harry, again, needed to face Voldemort and have it to where Voldemort was the one that killed the Horcrux within Harry. But also, it really ties up nicely with the idea of the themes of the entire story. Harry is not someone that is willing to let other people die for him consistently. And that's something Voldemort knows, right? Harry is very heroic. He will try to stop this from happening. And that plays into really nicely in the climax. But let's go back to the beginning, and we'll kind of talk about where this plot kind of went, and maybe why I think some of the pacing is not as great as I think other books in the series. And again, I'm not saying Deathly Hallows is a bad book, because what I'm comparing it to is some top tier books, right? I think the big three for me in this series, let me know if you guys think I'm wrong on this, is not in any particular order. Half-Blood, Goblet, and then Prisoner of Azkaban are kind of your top three. I think for most people, if I ask them what was their favorite book, it's probably going to be those three. Deathly Hallows is kind of like right after that. It's like the tier right underneath. So when you have these top tier books, Deathly Hallows is not a bad book. It isn't on that upper echelon of the Harry Potter series, in my opinion. Now, the book kind of starts out with Harry leaving his home, quote unquote. It didn't feel like a home to him, but at Privet Drive. And it's a really emotional time to start out this book, because it really shows you the danger and the stakes. There's this whole elaborate plan of how are we going to get Harry out? Because again, the Ministry kind of seems compromised at this point, and they're going to get even more compromised later in the story, actually like very shortly after this point in the story. And so there's this really elaborate plan, and eventually it basically has it again, where this idea that people are willing to die for Harry, as we have all of these potions to make a lot of Harry's friends and allies look like him, so that the Death Eaters won't know who is the real Harry. And so this battle continues, and it's a great kickstart because it shows how difficult it is to really travel just in general, how dark the world has become. And it really points to this idea that we are in the war state now. This is no more time of learning of Hogwarts. We're in war. And so, again, we see the severity. You know, people die in this battle. We see injuries happen. And they end up at the Burrow. And it's a very somber feeling because, yes, outside in this world of darkness, we actually see a wedding. We see Bill and Fleur's wedding. Now, this is a really important moment here because on one hand, you're going to see this idea of people getting married because of the war. You don't know if you're going to survive it. Again, really pointing to real life scenarios where we see this all the time. If you look at men going off to war in World War II, World War I, this happened all the time. Really young marriages, because who knows if you're going to be able to come back. I mean, again, look at Remus and Tonks. Both die, leaving their child an orphan without a parent, and kind of Harry takes over that kind of responsibility as well, being the godfather. And while we're on that topic, I think one of my favorite plot lines throughout the books is really the Lupin plot line. And it's something that's completely cut from the movie, which I think is a really big shame, is this idea of Lupin kind of running from some of his problems. I really love this because we see Harry having to be this person that kind of tells Lupin that, you know, he should be with his wife. He should be with his child. Or I guess at this point, not born yet, but still with Tonks. And I literally love that way this plot line kind of goes. And I hope if we, you know, get this Harry Potter show, that this is something that they really focus on because it's one of the best points of the story. Now, again, getting back to kind of the plot, I know we're kind of all scatterbrained with Deathly Hallows. There's just a lot going on, a lot to tie off, and it's just, you know, get it out of the way when I remember it. So we have this wedding, and unfortunately, this wedding gets infiltrated. The Ministry has been taken over, and so they come to this wedding to try and find Harry. And again, the plan before this was that Harry, Ron, and Hermione were going to leave at some point. It was going to be after this wedding, but that was always going to be the plan. They weren't going to go back to Hogwarts. That was too dangerous and just didn't really make any sense. And so they were going to head out. And we see this, and this to me is kind of, for me, where the story really slows down. This big opening is really well done. It's paced really well, where you have, again, build up a lot of goodbyes with, again, more stuff we just didn't really see in the movie and the Deathly Hallows. And I think the Deathly Hallows Part 1, it's such a weird movie because it kind of missed a lot of plot lines that were important, and it messed up some of the ones it had. And it also really didn't need to be 2 parts, in my opinion. So it was really weird the way this was translated to the movie. But we see a lot of these goodbyes. It's some really nice moments, especially with Dudley and Harry. And that really builds up really well to the stakes of the battle that we're going to see, getting to the Burrow. And so that's all paced well. And then you have the wedding. So kind of, again, the pace is kind of, you know, takes a little dip again because that's what you want to do after a battle. And that builds right back up to the wedding. And then after this, we're going to kind of have a deep dive where the pacing is kind of low for a while. They go back to Godric Hollow, kind of rises back up again. It's something where I think it's not bad. It's just I think we go a little bit too long with not a lot truly happening. So basically our main 3 characters are now on the run. Again, very similar to an idea of like a refugee during World War II, if you were Jewish or something like that, running away from persecution and the awful treatment of Jewish people in World War II. really feels like kind of what we're getting here, where if you're not pure blood, if you're, you know, a muggle born, you are being persecuted openly. So you go into hiding. And so we see our three kind of wandering around, just surviving, trying to survive, trying to get food. It's really a dark moment where they're struggling to survive, let alone carry out the mission that's been laid before them. And I like that. I like that element of it, adding kind of that realism to what's going on. But it does feel like it kind of drags on a little bit for me. Again, that's my personal take. You may have a different take. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I don't know how controversial this is. I don't really dive too much into, you know, Harry Potter like media content on like say YouTube, for instance. So I don't know what people's opinions are on this. Is just mine, but let me know. And so I kind of feel like it drags for a while. And you know, they again will eventually find the locket. The real locket, which we find out had been stolen by Mundungus, and then also goes to Umbridge. So again, I have an Umbridge thing again, and it's good. We're gonna have a kind of a resolution, I guess, to her kind of character arc from Order of the Phoenix that wasn't really touched upon too much in Half-Blood Prince. But we find out that, of course, she has it. So there's this whole infiltration of the Ministry thing, which is pretty cool. It's not got like it's not like the most interesting plot of the book, but it's still like a really interesting idea how they're infiltrating it. And again, polyjuice potions are used. It's a very reoccurring theme with the polyjuice potions. And long story short, they kind of end up getting it. It's really, this moment is really A, getting them a Horcrux, and 2, kind of showing the state of the Ministry, like what is going on in the real world at this point, how people are being treated, the discrimination going on. And so there's a lot of stuff that's really good here. We learn a lot more about the Black family. Regulus Black, again, a really interesting character. He's a character that's really only in this last book, but he's a character that I would have loved to actually see. Like if they were ever going to start up like a Harry Potter cinematic universe type thing, similar to Marvel, Disney, or Star Wars, I would really like to see just like a story about him. He's a really interesting character that goes through a lot of character battles that I, as someone who really likes morally gray characters, or characters that really transition from maybe one state of mind to another and have an interesting character development, he's a very interesting character. So he's a character that I would love to see expanded more upon, but we get a little bit more of that background. I think the resolution of Creature's arc and kind of going kind of to Harry's side is another really interesting facet of this book that I really enjoyed. And also kind of the final payoff for the house elves that, you know, was really a heavy focus of like Order of the Phoenix and Goblet of Fire as well. That was kind of a dropped plot in Half-Blood. There wasn't really any resolution to that. And so we finally get that here, as they're going to actually also help out in the battle for Hogwarts. So that's something, you know, again, later on. But we see a little bit of that kind of come to fruition. And so after this moment, it's a lot of wandering around, trying to figure out, A, how we destroy the Horcruxes, because we don't really know that at this point. 2, okay, where are the rest of them? Because we're still missing a couple at this point. And so this starts to kind of eat away at our crew, right? Ron is someone that just is not enjoying himself. He's not enjoying himself for a couple of reasons. Again, they're struggling to survive. 2, they don't have like any information to go on, really. And he is someone that's worried about his family, right? How could he not? He has all of these family members that are deeply in the Order of the Phoenix that are gonna be like basically hunted down. He is really worried about that, and that's all playing on him while the Horcrux is also here, making him feel those feelings of rage and anger and despair. And it's just an interesting plotline where Ron just goes off for a while. And this kind of starts like the next section of kind of this plot where we go to Godric's Hollow. And again, I'm kind of maybe missing a couple things because I don't want to explain the entire book. You know, read it if you want to. It's a great book, but kind of hitting on the main points. They go to Godric Hollow, and it's really nice to go back to where Harry was born. We haven't been here throughout the entire series, even where Dumbledore was, you know, grew up as well. And so it was nice to go back here. We see some more development with, you know, Harry being attacked by Nagini and his wand being broken by an accident with Hermione. And there's a lot of good stuff here that kind of starts to build up that plot again and build up the pacing, right? Where we kind of had a really slow period where the ministry stuff was solid, but it wasn't like, it's not like a big point. I think when you, at the overall point of this story, it's not like a major like up pace type thing, in my opinion. Like, you have a couple notable ones where it's like the first battle at the beginning of the book. Really, I think Godric's Hollow, and then that whole section leading to Malfoy Manor, and then you're gonna have another kind of decline, then you have Gringotts, and then Hogwarts. So this kind of feels like, again, more of that like really low point of the story. And we also find out some stuff about the Deathly Hallows through Luna's father. And so there's a lot of stuff that's very interesting here. And all while we have Snape, who is this character that is being a double agent, right? He is someone that's saying that he is with Voldemort while is still basically serving in Dumbledore's interests even after he is dead, helping Harry get the sword, doing things to try and make life a little bit better at Hogwarts, even though the Death Eaters aren't helping and Voldemort's kind of breathing down his neck on the way Hogwarts should be run. He's trying to do all this and play both sides, and he does a fantastic job of it, as he's done the entire story. And so we see all this. Eventually, they get the Sword of Gryffindor. They destroy the Locket Horcrux. So a lot goes on here, and this all kind of leads to the Malfoy kind of manor section of this story, which is extremely good. It's really dark. We're seeing Hermione, or we're not seeing, but we're hearing her being tortured. We see the state of our characters that are locked in this prison. And it really shows you the darkness again of this story. How this is not the Harry Potter of book one. We're getting into some very dark stuff. And we see Dobby, who pops up again to save the day. And he's been a reoccurring character throughout the entire series. Unlike in the movies, which again was not a great point there. They should have kept Dobby's storyline throughout the movies, but they did not. And so again, we see a heroic sacrifice from Dobby to get our main characters out of Malfoy Manor, saving them from Voldemort. And all the while, Voldemort has been getting a little bit suspicious about his Horcruxes and about his wand, because his wand doesn't seem to be working against Harry's. And this is going to lead him to finding the Elder Wand, which will happen a little bit later in the story and not at this point exactly. And so our characters escape, barely. Dobby gives his life to get them to safety. One of the most heart-wrenching deaths of this book specifically, just based upon how close that relationship has got with Harry and Dobby. This is a character that is really one of Harry's like best friends at this point. It feels like it's something the show just missed out on him, or the movie missed out on. Sorry if I keep saying show for the series. I don't know why I keep doing that, but yeah. And so we move on to this. Now this is where Deathly Hallows Part 2 picks up in the movies, which is a weird spot, I guess, because we again have a bit of downtime, right? They're with Bill and Fleur, and they're kind of planning the next stage, kind of putting things together, right? We see a couple important things also happen at Malfoy Manor that I kind of like just jumped over, but Harry disarms Malfoy, so that's going to be huge for the Elder Wand stuff at the end of the story, and so that happens. But another thing happens where Bellatrix is really worried about something in her vault. And that is a big indicator to Harry that there's probably going to be a Horcrux. So then we have this whole heist of Gringotts, and we ride out on a dragon. Really great part of the story. I think it's much better done in the book than it is the movie. Again, I feel like I'm hating on the movies. I think the movies are good, but I think they're just much better done in the books, in my opinion anyway. And it's just a great heist. I don't really want to give a bunch of the details. It's, summed up pretty well. It's a really important part of the story, and that leads them to Hogwarts. Again, this story has been built upon what do we know about Albus, and really discovering some of his flaws, how he was involved with Grindelwald. It's a really interesting part of the story, and I really enjoy that facet of playing on Harry's ideas of who Dumbledore was, was Dumbledore someone that used Harry quite a lot and didn't tell him the full truth? And in that regard, it's kind of true. And that kind of leads us to really the ending of the story. And there's not much, really that I should explain, except it's the battle for Hogwarts. The Death Eaters, all of Voldemort's forces come here. It's Harry and the forces of good, all of the people supporting him, most of the Hogwarts students that are above a certain age, the Order of the Phoenix, Hagrid, and his half-brother Giant. And it's a really good climax. It's a really good end to the story. These two forces facing off, and the forces at Hogwarts trying to just give Harry enough time to find the Horcruxes. And again, I talked about this, earlier on, but the idea here of Harry having to give his life, and I guess we'll talk about the Snape reveal at this point as well. And Snape is this character that is revealed to actually have been working for the good guys the entire time. He is someone that was helping Dumbledore every step of the way. He was protecting Harry at certain points of the series. He is someone that I won't say is a hero. I know people like to say that Snape was this character that redeemed himself by the end of it, but he is a character that still was a bully. He was someone that still threatened children. And I mean, just go back to Neville. And I think there was a point in the story, I might be getting this a little mixed up, but Snape was going to poison Neville's toad. And like, it was a wild sequence of events, but think about it like that. Like, Snape is still a villain in my opinion, but he's more of a morally gray. Like, he does some villainous actions, but he also does some good actions. And yeah, so we find out that Snape always loved Lily. We get more of the backstory between the two characters, why Snape, again, building on kind of the Order of the Phoenix stuff of why Snape doesn't like Harry, why he sees Harry as just his father, and James and Snape did not have a good relationship. And also Snape is still subconsciously jealous because James married Lily, and that's what Snape wanted. And so it's this really great reveal that, all of this has been working towards this point, that Dumbledore wanted to die. Dumbledore went out on his own terms. It wasn't something like Snape turned on them. And the biggest reveal, and again, this whole chapter of Snape's memories is probably the best chapter, I think, in the Harry Potter series, outside of maybe when Harry goes to confront Voldemort in this book. Again, the highs of this chapter are some of the best of the series, but then like a lot of this book is kind of like, on par with some of the other books, or maybe even a little lower. And so we get Harry having to make this decision to sacrifice himself, and getting this moment where he talks with all of his loved ones using the resurrection stone. And at this point, Harry has become the master of death. He is the true wielder of the Elder Wand. He has the resurrection stone, and he has the cloak. And he goes to confront Voldemort. And Voldemort tries to kill him, and it does not work. Again, this is one of my favorite points of the story. It really is the turning point. And the rest kind of falls into place. Harry pretends to be dead, and we see that love once again gets the best of Voldemort, as Draco's mother allows Harry to kind of live, or lie to Voldemort that he's dead because of Draco, and because of her love for him, and him still being alive. And we see that love, especially mother's love, defeating him again. And so we have the big finale. We have all of our characters in this battle. Bellatrix is killed by Molly in probably the most badass fashion. Voldemort and Harry dueling, and Harry winning. It's a fantastic conclusion. And it really concludes this story, I think, in a very satisfying way. A very compelling end to the story. And it isn't all like rainbows and sunshine. There's a lot of people that die in this battle or get injured and things. But for the most part, it's a fairly happy ending. Again, our main trio survive pretty unscathed. Neville gets his hero moments. And it's just it's a really nice ending to the story. And again, I didn't cover every detail of the story. I would be here for absolute hours if I went through every single detail, and I went a pretty long way with the Deathly Hallows because I thought it was important, so as it is kind of the conclusion of the story, and I have an opinion that I'm not sure how it will be received. I don't know how people perceive the Deathly Hallows as a book. For me, again, I would probably rank it fourth behind the top three that I've mentioned in this video multiple times. But my final verdict of this video and of the series, of taking months and months and months and a lot of time to reread this series, it holds up really well. The first two books can be a little bit strenuous and can be a little bit slower to get through because of the, in my opinion, target demographic of those two books. But once you get past those, I mean, this series it's really good. It's very well written, and it's something that I think will always probably be a household name. I know Harry Potter to this point has probably slipped in its brand power, I guess, or how relevant it is nowadays. But again, for me growing up, again, I grew up with the movies. I grew up, you know, this is one of the first series that I had read as a kid. So yeah, it definitely holds up really well up to this point. So thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.